Hey, before anything else, can I ask you a quick favor? Your subscription is what keeps this channel alive. If you've ever felt something from this story or any of the others, or if this channel has ever made your day better, please make sure to hit that subscribe button. It helps me way more than you can imagine. Now, let's get into the story. Have you ever imagined falling in love with a woman thinking she was a man? That's exactly what happened to Princess Isabella. The grand hall shimmered with candlelight, the chandeliers casting golden webs of fire across marble floors polished to near reflection. Velvet drapes pooled at the windows like spilled wine, and laughter, polite, measured, aristocratic, rose above the soft strains of violins and harp. Princess Isabella of Cavenhart stood at the top of the staircase, her gloved hands resting gently on the balustrade, her spine straight with duty, her heart quietly sinking. She had attended dozens of these affairs, each one more suffocating than the last. Her gown, pale blue and embroidered with silver thread, clung to her like a sigh. It had taken 2 maids and 1,000 pins to shape her into the perfect vision of royal femininity, but no amount of lace or jewels could mask the disinterest behind her composed smile. This was supposed to be her night, to meet eligible suitors, to flirt demurely, to accept dances and compliments, and perhaps, if the stars aligned, to choose a man with whom she could tolerate the rest of her life. And yet, as she descended the stairs to murmurs of admiration and respectful bows, Isabella felt none of the thrill that the fairy tales promised. She felt observed, weighed, catalogued. A jewel passed between gloved hands. She drifted through conversations like a ghost, nodding, smiling, pretending to care about naval strategies and imported wines. The air was too warm, the perfumes too sweet. Her skin itched beneath the satin. And then she saw him. Across the ballroom, framed between 2 marble columns, a figure stood apart from the crowd. He wore a tailored black coat with silver embroidery and carried himself with a composure that felt less like entitlement and more like restraint, as though he were holding back something wild behind carefully measured posture. His hair was dark, slightly tousled as if he'd just stepped out of a windstorm and hadn't bothered to fix it. His eyes, Isabella froze when they met hers, were the color of midnight, and they didn't flicker away like the others. They held her. They studied her. They saw her. Her breath caught. She looked away instinctively, then looked back, and he was still watching. Not leering. Not amused. Curious. She excused herself from a conversation she hadn't heard a word of and crossed the ballroom, her steps light, deliberate. She didn't approach him directly. No, that would be too bold, but paused near the refreshment table, pretending to be interested in the sugared fruit slices laid out like jewels. He moved closer, slowly, casually, as if drawn by the same invisible force that tugged at her pulse. "Princess Isabella," he said, voice smooth and low, with a faint northern lilt that brushed her skin like velvet. "I must thank you. I was beginning to think no one interesting would attend tonight." She turned to him, raising a brow. "And you are?" A slow smile touched his lips, sharp and devastating. "Lord Cashin of Eastmoor, though some call me Count Wesley." A false title, perhaps, but one no one else questioned. "I wasn't aware Eastmoor had any remaining nobility," Isabella replied, intrigued. "We make a habit of being underestimated," he said. "It makes our victories more satisfying." She laughed, genuinely, which surprised her. He offered her a hand. "May I have this dance?" She hesitated, her heartbeat louder than the music. But her hand found his, and his fingers closed over hers, firm and warm, and suddenly the crowd didn't exist. They stepped into the rhythm of the waltz with startling ease. His frame was lean but strong, his movements effortless. And his touch. Oh, his touch was electric. He didn't grip her too tightly, didn't push or pull, but guided with subtle pressure and impossible grace. She studied his face, how his jaw tensed when he spun her, how his lips parted just slightly when he looked at her, really looked at her. There was something soft about his eyes when he laughed, and yet something guarded. "You dance well for someone so recently underestimated," she murmured. "And you look far too bored for someone so frequently admired," he replied. "Are you always this forward?" Only when I'm desperate for something real. Her cheeks flushed, not from embarrassment, but from the thrill that bloomed in her chest. He dipped her low, and for a breathless moment, their faces were mere inches apart. She smelled cedar and salt. She saw something flicker behind his gaze, a shadow of sadness, or fear, or longing. Then he pulled her upright again and spun her away, as if to break whatever spell had begun to form. When the music ended, Isabella felt breathless in a way no corset had ever made her. "Thank you for the dance, Lord Cashin," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "It was my honor, Your Highness." But as she turned to leave, she felt his fingers brush, just barely, against the inside of her wrist. A touch so fleeting she could have imagined it. Yet it burned. She didn't look back. Not yet. But her pulse had already memorized him. And the night had only begun. The next dance passed in a blur. Isabella couldn't recall the man's name, nor the color of his coat, nor a single word he said. She smiled, nodded, curtsied when expected, but her mind was elsewhere, trapped in the lingering warmth where Lord Cashin's fingers had ghosted over her wrist, where his voice still curled behind her ear like an unfinished sentence. The air inside the ballroom had thickened somehow. The candles burned lower, deeper, shadows stretching long beneath the golden flicker, and every time Isabella turned her head, she found herself scanning the crowd for him. Not searching exactly, but anticipating, hoping. And then she saw him again, standing near a group of nobles, but not truly part of them, his head slightly tilted as a tall duchess spoke animatedly about hunting falcons. He wasn't listening. He was watching her. Their eyes met across the crowd and held. Just long enough to quicken her breath. Just long enough to make her forget what conversation she'd just left. Just long enough to feel it again, that silent pull, as if an invisible thread was winding tighter between them. She turned away before she embarrassed herself. She told herself to focus. She was a princess, for heaven's sake. But her feet led her back toward the edge of the ballroom anyway, toward the terrace doors where the cool night air teased the curtains. She needed space. She needed to breathe. But when she slipped through the archway and onto the stone balcony, moonlight painting her shoulders in silver, he was already there. Of course he was. "Fresh air?" he asked softly, not turning to look at her, just leaning on the balustrade like he belonged to the night itself. "And yet somehow you always find it first," she replied, folding her gloved hands before her, careful not to get too close. "I like to be prepared," he said, finally glancing at her. His eyes caught the moonlight and returned it, sharp and secret. "Isn't that what tonight is about?" She gave a polite smile. "Tonight is about duty." "So you've said, but you don't wear it well." "You speak boldly for someone I've only just met." "Do I?" he asked, and took a slow step toward her. "Perhaps it's simply that no one else speaks to you the way you deserve." Isabella's lips parted. Her heart beat too loudly. "You presume a great deal, my lord." "I observe," he said, and another step closed the space between them. Not enough to touch, but enough to feel the heat. "You've been bored for hours." Smiling on command, dismissing every suitor with kindness, but without interest. "And when we danced, you weren't pretending." Her throat tightened. "You watched me that closely?" "Only because I couldn't help it." The words hung between them, suspended in the stillness of midnight. A breeze stirred the silk of her gown, and a strand of hair slipped from her updo, catching on her cheek. Before she could react, his fingers moved. Delicate, confident. He reached out and brushed the hair back behind her ear. The touch barely lasted a heartbeat, but it was electric. Too intimate. Too gentle. She didn't move. Neither did he. "You're not what you seem," she whispered before she could stop herself. A flicker crossed his face. Too fast to name. "Neither are you." Footsteps echoed behind them, and the spell broke. Isabella turned, found a maid approaching with a note. She took it absently, not reading it yet, still feeling the echo of that touch. When she looked back, Cashin had retreated, already slipping through the terrace door with a quiet bow. Later, inside the ballroom again, Isabella watched him dance with a lady of the court, graceful, charming, all perfect poise, and yet his eyes found her over his partner's shoulder. Every time. And when he passed by her later, near the grand staircase, his gloved hand brushed hers. Not by accident. Not unnoticed. Just a whisper of leather against silk. Enough to promise. Enough to haunt. The ballroom was growing warmer. The chandeliers glittered with new intensity, and the scent of roses and wine had thickened in the air, clinging to every silk hem and embroidered cuff like perfume. Isabella fanned herself politely as she moved among the guests, but her attention was no longer on the names or faces or titles that fluttered around her like painted moths. Her mind, traitorous, insistent, drifted back to the terrace, to the feel of gloved fingers brushing hair from her cheek, to the way Cashin's eyes hadn't just looked at her, but into her. It was reckless, dangerous, irresponsible, and completely impossible to ignore. She danced again, this time with Lord Wells, a pleasant enough baron with a penchant for long-winded stories about grain tariffs. She nodded and smiled, turned when prompted, stepped when required, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Every time she moved, she searched for Cashin, not directly, but with flicks of her gaze toward doorways, corners, clusters of nobles. And he was always there, not close enough to approach, but always watching. Always aware. It should have unnerved her. Instead, it made her feel seen in a way no courtier ever had. During a pause between dances, Isabella slipped into the side gallery, where portraits of past monarchs lined the walls and few guests lingered. She needed quiet, shadows, a breath that didn't taste like expectation. She ran her fingers over the edge of a frame, studying the painted eyes of queens long gone. "I never liked this one," a voice said softly behind her. She turned to find Cashin once again, of course, leaning against the doorframe with a glass of wine in hand. "Too smug," he added, nodding toward the painting of Queen Matilda, as if she knew the artists were more interested in her jewelry than her policies. Isabella arched a brow. Most men don't notice the difference. Most men don't know how to stitch a hem or balance a banquet account either. She laughed quietly, but the sound caught in her throat. Something about the way he said it, casually too easily, felt strange. Not wrong, but unusual. She stepped closer. "Tell me something honest, Lord Cashin. What is your family's crest?" He didn't flinch. "Two silver stags beneath a black crown. Our house motto is Fortune favors the quiet." "Convenient," she said, "for someone who avoids attention so elegantly." He smiled. "You wound me, princess." "I doubt you're easily wounded." "Not by most." The gallery fell silent again. Isabella studied him in the dim light. He stood too still, too composed. His coat fit perfectly, but the cut of it was slightly dated, as if borrowed, not tailored. His boots bore faint scuff marks, unusual for someone claiming nobility. And then there were the gloves. Always the gloves. She had never seen him without them. "Do you fence?" she asked suddenly. "Only when cornered," he replied. "And ride?" "Fast enough to outrun regret." She tilted her head. "You're clever." "You're dangerous," he replied, and something in his voice lowered. "You ask questions most women avoid. Most women are trained not to ask. You weren't." "No," he stepped closer. "Good." And again there it was, that weight, that pull. The air between them tightened like a drawn string, vibrating with something unsaid. She could smell the faintest trace of lavender and leather. Her eyes dropped to his mouth, just for a second. Too soft for a soldier. Too delicate. "You're hiding something," she whispered. "And still you stand here," he said, "closer than you need to be." Her breath trembled. "I'm not afraid of mystery." "Then let me keep mine a little longer." She didn't move away. But neither did she cross the final inch between them. Not yet. A bell chimed. Supper would be announced soon. He stepped back with a nod, as if knowing he'd given just enough. "Until the next question, Your Highness." She watched him disappear down the corridor. Her heart thudded like a drum in her ribs. And behind her, Queen Matilda's portrait smirked knowingly. The banquet hall glowed with gold and crystal, every surface gleaming under candlelight, every laugh rehearsed, every bite of pheasant taken with dainty precision. Isabella sat at the long royal table, nodding politely at the Lord Chancellor's tedious story about naval routes while her wine sat untouched, and her thoughts drifted back, always back, to the gallery, to the shadows, to the smirk that played at the corner of Lord Cassion's mouth when he said she was dangerous. That word had lodged itself in her like a splinter, aching, oddly thrilling. She tried to eat, but everything tasted like paper. Her eyes wandered across the room, past the long gowns and powdered wigs, until they found him again. He stood farther down the hall, not seated, not eating, simply observing the crowd from behind a stone pillar, his posture easy, his eyes sharp. He wasn't pretending to belong. He wasn't trying to impress. He was simply there, bold and quiet and entirely other. He caught her looking and tilted his head just slightly, an invitation, a dare, a silent acknowledgement that they were still circling each other even across 100 feet of glitter and decorum. Her stomach fluttered. After supper, the dancing resumed, more fevered now as the night deepened, as wine loosened conversation and chandeliers dimmed to a more romantic glow. Love what you've seen so far and want to help me keep creating these awesome stories on this channel? Then subscribe and hit the bell. Your subscription supports the channel and makes sure you get more exciting stories. Isabella danced twice, once with the Earl of Denshire, whose breath reeked of port, and once with a viscount from the coast who spent the entire waltz listing the bloodlines of his horses. She smiled through it all, but it was muscle memory. Her mind was elsewhere. Cassion hadn't asked her to dance again, and she refused to look for him. But every time she turned, she felt him close, a glance from a stairwell, a silhouette at the edge of the musician's alcove, a reflection in a gilded mirror. She was starting to feel hunted, and she didn't mind it. During a slower piece, Isabella stepped out again, not to the main terrace, but to the east wing, where the sound of violins dulled behind heavy doors. Her heels clicked softly against the marble as she walked down a quiet hallway lit only by lanterns in crystal sconces. She needed a moment to breathe, to remember who she was beneath all this silk and scrutiny. She slipped into the old conservatory. It was nearly empty, save for a few elderly nobles resting on settees by the windows. A breeze carried the scent of lilies through the open arches, and the moon cast silver bars of light across the floor. She wandered between potted palms and ivy-wrapped columns until she found herself near the fountain, its gentle trickle soothing, grounding. And then, as if conjured by her thoughts, she heard a voice behind her. "I was beginning to think I'd scared you away." She didn't turn. "Do I seem easily frightened?" "No," Cassion said, stepping beside her. "But I've known braver women to run from less." She looked at him. Up close, the moonlight softened his features, the curve of his cheek, the fine line of his jaw, the lashes far too long for any man. He looked almost unreal, like a dream carved from night. "You're everywhere I go tonight," she murmured. "Only where I think you'll be. And what would you have done if I'd stayed at the table?" "Waited." "You're persistent. You're worth the effort." Her heart skipped. He was too close now. The sound of the fountain seemed to vanish beneath the rush of her blood. He looked down at her, and for a breathless second, she thought he might touch her again. But he didn't. Instead, he leaned against the stone edge of the fountain, letting the silence stretch between them. "You don't like being watched," he said. "And yet you keep watching me. Maybe I'm trying to understand you. What have you learned so far?" "That you lie well," she said. "But not about everything." "And what, pray tell, do I lie about?" "Your title, for one. Your accent slips sometimes. And you never speak of your family. Not really. Perhaps I have none worth mentioning. Or perhaps you're hiding something." "Would it matter?" he asked, eyes sharp now. "If I told you I was nothing more than a thief who borrowed a coat and a name for one night of freedom?" She blinked. "Is that true? Would you dance with me again if it was?" She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped forward. Slowly, deliberately. "I'm not interested in what others say you are. I'm interested in how you look at me, how you move when we dance, how you always find me before I realize I need finding." His expression shifted, something softer, almost pained. You should be careful, princess. The more you look, the more I fear you'll see too much. Maybe I want to. Maybe I want you to. The space between them pulsed. Her hand brushed his. Not an accident. Not this time.
He didn't move away. Neither did she.
But the sound of a violin rising sharply in the distance reminded them where they were, who they were. He took a slow step back. Come find me before midnight, he said. Why? Because by then, I may not be brave enough to let you look again. And he vanished into the shadows before she could speak. Isabella told herself she was simply curious. That's what she repeated in her mind as she drifted back into the crowd, lips parted just enough to smile, eyes scanning the ballroom not for beauty or status, but for scraps of truth. She had danced with lords, barons, and cousins of princes. She had endured hours of polite flattery from suitors chosen by their bloodlines, and not one had ever made her stomach twist the way Cashin did with a glance. But fascination was dangerous. And curiosity, when fed too well, had a way of becoming compulsion. So she asked, quietly, delicately, a passing question to Lady Henley, had she ever heard of a Lord Cashin of Eastmoor? The woman blinked and smiled vaguely, saying it sounded familiar. The name passed through her lips like air, unmemorable. Isabella moved to another group, feigning interest in embroidery trends while listening closely. Again, no clear answers. The name was known but vague. No stories. No scandal. No family connections she could trace. The pieces didn't align. And yet he danced as though trained by the Royal Academy. He spoke with the precision of a scholar. He moved with the grace of someone who wore secrets like silk. She found herself once again watching him from the far end of the ballroom. He was speaking with an older nobleman, listening attentively, had bowed just enough to be respectful, but his eyes flicked toward her with quiet amusement. He knew she was watching. Of course he did. She turned away quickly, flustered. Her palms itched. Her pulse tapped against her ribs like a metronome set too fast. The music swelled again, a new waltz, slow and lush, and she had barely taken 2 steps before he was there, offering his hand, eyes already asking the question.
She didn't speak.
She simply placed her hand in his.
They danced.
The world shrank. There were no guests, no chandeliers, no thrones or lineage or futures hanging over their heads like drawn swords. Only the hush between steps, the brief press of his hand at her back, the closeness of his breath as he whispered, "You've been asking about me." She blinked up at him. "And what have you heard?"
"That you don't exist."
He smiled, slow and devastating. "Then I suppose I'm exactly what you're looking for." Her laugh was breathless, too real. "You enjoy being a riddle, don't you?" "Only when I find someone worthy of solving it." She stepped closer, their bodies nearly touching now. Propriety be damned. "Give me a truth, then. Just one." He was silent for a beat too long. "Then, my name isn't really Cashin." Her breath hitched. "Is it a stolen name?" "A borrowed one. For a single night." "And tomorrow?" "Tomorrow, I disappear." The words sliced through the music, subtle and final. Her feet faltered. He steadied her with a hand at her waist, fingers firm through the fabric of her gown. His touch lingered just a second too long. Her voice dropped. "Why come at all, if you plan to vanish?" "Because I wanted to know what it felt like to be seen by someone who mattered." Their eyes locked. Her lips parted. The music slowed. Around them, the dance floor glowed, blurred, faded. 1,000 eyes might have been watching, but in that moment, there was only his hand at her back, her fingertips grazing his chest, the scent of wild herbs and rain clinging to his collar. Her voice was barely a whisper. "And have you found what you came for?" His answer was in the silence. The tension between them thrummed like a violin string pulled too tight. When the music ended, neither of them moved. They stood still, breathless, suspended between truth and illusion. Only when a clatter of applause broke around them did he step back, bowing with a reverence that felt too intimate. "Careful, princess," he said low. "If you keep chasing me, you may not like what you find." Then stop running, she replied. But he was already gone again, weaving through the crowd like smoke. And for the first time in her life, Isabella no longer cared if anyone saw her staring after someone she shouldn't. She just wanted to know who he really was, and why every step closer made her heart ache in ways no crown ever had. The ballroom spun without her. Isabella stood near the edge of the crowd, posture impeccable, smile soft, hands folded gently, but her thoughts were no longer tethered to this space, this night, this royal obligation dressed in silk and chandelier light. All she could feel was the echo of Cashin's final words, the gravity in his voice when he said he would disappear, as though the whole evening were built on borrowed time. She scanned the room once, twice, but he was nowhere. Not near the musicians. Not by the terrace. Not among the other lords posturing for attention. Her pulse flickered with a strange urgency. She murmured an excuse to the nearest courtier and slipped down the corridor that led toward the west wing. Here, the noise of the celebration dulled into whispers, replaced by the muted rhythm of her own heartbeat in her ears. Tapestries lined the walls, their embroidered histories watching her as she passed. Every click of her heels felt too loud. The corridor curved, and ahead she saw an open doorway. The music room, unused tonight, left dim and forgotten. She stepped inside, and there he was. Cashin stood near the grand piano, his coat unbuttoned at the collar, his profile bathed in gold from a single flickering wall sconce. He didn't turn when she entered. "I was beginning to think I'd dreamed you," she said quietly. "I hoped you wouldn't come," he replied, just as soft. "Then why did you wait here?" "Because I knew you would." She took a slow step forward. The room felt heavier now, like the air itself had thickened around them. "Why hide from me?" she asked. "You already know I'm not who I pretend to be. I want to hear it from you." He turned then, fully, and something in his expression made her stop. There was no smirk, no practiced charm, just a flicker of fear behind steady eyes. "Do you really want the truth, Isabella?" Her name from his lips was a confession. She nodded once. "Then come closer," he said, almost a whisper, "and see for yourself." She approached him slowly, stopping barely a breath away. Close enough to see the way his pulse fluttered at his throat. Close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him in waves. She reached up, her fingers brushing the edge of his collar, and he didn't stop her. Didn't flinch. Her hand rose further, almost touching his cheek. Then he moved. Not away. Forward. Their heads tilted at the same moment, too slight to be conscious, too natural to stop. Their mouths met barely. A brush. A breath. A press so light it might have been a sigh. It was not a kiss, not truly, not the kind one could name, or speak of, or even plan. It was a moment, accidental, inevitable, a peck on the lips, nothing more than lips pressed against lips with no time to think or pull away. And yet, when they did pull back, both were breathless. Stillness swallowed them. Her eyes searched his face, wide, stunned. His lashes lowered, and for a flicker of a second, he looked shattered. She began, but her voice cracked. "That wasn't planned," he offered, his voice low.
No.
"It wasn't. It didn't feel like an accident." "It didn't," he agreed. But neither moved. Neither dared. She stepped back, only slightly, heart hammering like thunder beneath silk. "I shouldn't be here."
"No," he said.
"But neither should I." The air between them was so thick now it could have been touched. He looked at her as if memorizing everything. "There's something I want to tell you," he said quietly. "Then tell me." "Not here. Not yet." "Why?" "Because once I say it, there's no going back.
And
I want this to last, even just a little longer." She swallowed, nodded. Then, before she could second-guess herself, she turned and walked away, slowly, deliberately, knowing he would be watching. And he was. Behind her, his breath stayed caught in his chest, the echo of their barely touch still burning like fire across his lips. In that moment, everything had changed. And yet, nothing had. Not yet. The music had changed. Isabella noticed at the moment she stepped back into the ballroom. The rhythm was lighter now, faster, meant for laughter and flirtation, but to her ears it sounded hollow, like a distant echo trying too hard to pretend nothing had shifted. And everything had. The corridor, the music room, the breathless brush of lips, that accidental, undeniable touch still lingered on her mouth like a secret flame. She walked slowly, ignoring the noblemen who turned to bow or offer their hands, her mind tangled in 1,000 thoughts. It had not been a kiss. Not truly. But it had shattered something inside her. A line crossed. A truth glimpsed. She stood by the refreshment table, fingers ghosting over the rim of a crystal glass, watching as the room moved without her. And then she saw him again, Cashin, near the far wall, speaking with a tall man in a hunter-green coat. His stance was casual, but his eyes betrayed him. They searched for her the same way her searched for him. And when their gazes locked across the crowd, everything else faded. Again. Always. But this time, Isabella didn't approach. She turned away, heart pounding, and made her way toward the grand staircase, ascending one level to the mezzanine. From here, she could observe without being seen. The balcony offered a full view of the ballroom, its columns casting long shadows in the candlelight, the scent of jasmine stronger up here, carried on a breeze from the open arches. She needed space. Not to escape him, but to understand herself. Because if she was honest, brutally honest, Cashin wasn't the only one hiding behind a mask tonight. She had come to this ball intending to play a part. The obedient princess, the eligible royal, the polished daughter meant to choose a man and carry on the crown. But what if that had never truly been her? What if the reason Cashin drew her so fiercely had less to do with mystery and more to do with recognition? Her mind raced with memories of quiet thoughts never spoken aloud. The strange discomfort she'd always felt under the gaze of male suitors. The way her skin came alive not from flattery, but from connection. From understanding. From the way Cashin looked at her like she was something more than a prize to be won. She pressed her fingers to her lips. The soft graze of his mouth still pulsed there. And something inside her whispered, not in fear but in clarity, "You didn't pull away." She heard footsteps and turned. Cashin was there. He stood a few paces behind, unsure, as if he hadn't expected to find her but had been drawn here nonetheless. "You left quickly," he said, voice low. "I needed air," she replied, her tone too steady. "You always find the best corners for that." He stepped closer, just enough. "I didn't mean to, neither did I." Silence. Thick and brimming with what they weren't yet brave enough to name. He leaned against the balustrade beside her. Not touching, but near enough to feel. "I haven't been honest with you," he said. "No," she murmured. "You haven't. And yet you keep letting me near." "Because I feel like I already know you," she said. "Even if I don't know your name." He didn't answer. Just looked at her like he wished she'd stop being so unafraid. "I should have stayed away." "But you didn't." He shook his head, slow. "I didn't." They stood like that for a long moment, watching the dance below, their arms nearly brushing. And when she reached up to adjust a pearl pin in her hair, her fingers grazed his hand. Neither moved away. The contact was brief, but it sparked through her like fire meeting silk. He turned to her slowly. "You feel it too," he said. It wasn't a question. She nodded, heart in her throat. "I don't want a night to end," she whispered.
"It will," he said.
"But not yet." "No," she agreed. "Not yet." And then, gently, his gloved hand reached out, not to take hers, but to rest lightly against the back of her arm. A simple touch. A grounding one. But her whole body leaned into it. "Tell me something real," she said. "Anything." He was quiet for a long breath. Then, softly, "I'm not here to marry anyone." She blinked. "Neither am I." They looked at each other then, both of them wrapped in secrets and longing, shadows and silk. The music rose again below, and neither of them moved. Not yet. The ballroom gleamed below them like a spilled dream, all gold and silk and candlelight, but Isabella no longer saw it. Her eyes were fixed on the profile beside her, the line of a jaw too elegant, the curve of a shoulder too refined, the posture too precise to belong entirely to the story she'd been told. Cashin stood with his hands folded behind his back, his gaze locked on the dancers, his mouth a quiet line of restraint. But Isabella wasn't watching the crowd anymore. She was watching him. The way he stood, as if unaccustomed to the shape of the coat. The way he adjusted his gloves as though they were more armor than fashion. The way his breath caught slightly when their arms brushed. And the voice, soft, melodic, and just a shade too light. Her heart beat faster, but not in alarm, in recognition. She said nothing for a long while, only let the thought grow in the silence, warm and pulsing and real. And when he turned toward her, when their eyes met again beneath the flickering torchlight, she thought, I see you. I finally see you.
But still, she said nothing.
Instead, she offered him her hand. Dance with me again, she whispered. He hesitated, just for a heartbeat, but then took it, and they descended the staircase together like a secret blooming between footsteps. The crowd parted as they crossed the marble floor. Whispers followed them, curious glances from nobles who had seen them together too many times now, but Isabella didn't care. Not anymore. The music swelled, this time a slower piece, haunting and full of spaces where confessions might live, and their bodies moved together with a grace that felt like memory. His hands were light at her waist, hers on his shoulder. But the closeness between them wasn't in the hold. It was in the breath, the silence, the heat. You're not like the others, she murmured.
Neither are you, he replied.
You wear a mask, she said. We all do. Yours fits too perfectly. Maybe it was never meant to fit at all. She dared to lean in then, just slightly, her cheek brushing his as they turned. And in that moment, her lips near his ear, she whispered, You're not a man, are you? The music didn't falter. But he did. Just slightly. Just enough. His breath caught. His fingers tensed. And then, slowly, he answered. No, it wasn't a confession. It was a release. She smiled. Not cruelly. Not in shock. But as if something deep inside her had finally aligned. I thought so, she said. When? The first time you touched my face. And yet, you stayed. Because I didn't care, she said simply. Because I didn't want you to stop. His eyes widened, not with fear, but with awe. You're not afraid? Of what? That the only person here who truly sees me also happens to be someone the world might misunderstand. She spun in his arms then, graceful, poised, and when they came together again, she was closer. I've lived a whole life pretending to want things I never truly wanted. You're the first person who ever made me question what it is I deserve. And what do you deserve? He asked, barely breathing. Honesty. Fire. A hand that doesn't flinch when it touches mine. His voice trembled. Isabella, don't hide anymore, she said. Not from me. The final notes of the song lingered in the air like mist. And for a moment they stood still, her forehead nearly against his, the heat between them building like the hush before lightning strikes. A sigh passed between them. A heartbeat. A choice. But before either could speak, a voice cut through the air behind them. Sharp, cold, interrupting. Princess Isabella. A word. It was her mother. Queen Evelyn, standing near the dais, her smile thin as parchment. Duty beckoned. Masks threatened to reclaim them both. Cashin stepped back. Not far, but enough. The distance ached. Isabella turned, nodded once to her mother, then looked back at him, her mystery, her truth wrapped in shadows. Meet me in the garden before the final bell, she said. Please. He bowed his head. I will. And when she walked away, the space between them remained, tense, sacred, electric. Both of them knew. There was no turning back now. The garden behind the palace was a realm of its own, quiet and silvered with moonlight, the lanterns along the gravel path casting halos that flickered gently in the soft midnight breeze. Roses bloomed despite the chill in the air, their perfume clinging to the hedges like a whispered promise. Isabella stood at the edge of the marble stairs, her hands cold despite her gloves, her pulse loud enough to drown the wind. She had slipped away as soon as she could, feigning weariness to the queen, ignoring the subtle glances from the court. She didn't care. Not tonight. Not after everything. Not after the way Cashin had looked at her, like someone who had already lost her once, and didn't know how to do it again. She waited beneath the old willow, where the stone bench curved into shadow. Every heartbeat that passed in silence stretched her thoughts tighter until she feared they might snap. And then she heard the footsteps.
Soft.
Certain. Her breath caught. Cashin stepped into view, coat unbuttoned, hair tousled, his entire body tense like he'd run the whole way. But it wasn't just urgency in his stance, it was fear. Isabella didn't speak. She only looked at him, this person who wasn't a person the world would ever accept in this form, in this role, in this ballroom. But she had accepted her. Before knowing, before confirming, something deeper had always recognized what was hidden beneath the mask. "You came," she said softly. "I said I would. I thought you might change your mind. I almost did." "Why?" Cashin, no, not Cashin anymore, looked away. "Because the moment you see all of me, you might not look at me the same." Isabella stepped forward, slow. "I already see you." She reached up and gently touched the edge of the collar. This time, there was no flinch, no resistance. With trembling fingers, she unfastened the top clasp. Then the second. The coat loosened slightly, revealing a softer silhouette beneath. Her breath hitched, but not in shock. In recognition. "Tell me your name," she whispered. Her eyes lifted to meet those endless, storm-dark eyes. "Casey," the other girl said finally, voice raw. "My name is Casey, daughter of the Duke of Westmore." The words settled like snow. Isabella nodded, almost breathless. "You're the one who disappeared from court. Everyone said you ran from an engagement." Casey gave a bitter laugh. "I didn't run. I traded the dress for a sword and found out the world listened more when they thought I was a man. I fought. I trained. I passed every test. And for one night, I wanted to know what it was like to be seen without being dismissed." "You were never invisible," Isabella said. "Not to me." Casey's throat moved as she swallowed hard. "I didn't plan to speak to you. I just wanted to watch. One dance. But then you looked at me, and I forgot every reason I had to stay away." Isabella was trembling now, just slightly, not from fear but from the weight of the truth between them. "All this time," she murmured, "you were never lying. You were just trying to breathe." "I didn't mean to hurt you," Casey said. "I didn't know how far it would go. I didn't expect you to," she trailed off. "To what?" Isabella asked, voice barely a whisper. "To make me want the impossible." The air between them was too charged, too fragile. Isabella took one more step, and now they stood face to face, no ballroom, no titles, no illusions. Just moonlight and skin and silence. "Then say it," Isabella said. "If it's impossible, say it. Say it before we lose the chance." But Casey couldn't. Not yet. Her jaw tensed, her shoulders stiffened, and the ache in her eyes was too much to bear. "I don't know how to want something I'm not allowed to keep," she said. Isabella stared at her for a long, still moment. Then, "You don't have to keep me. You just have to stop running from me." Casey looked down, eyes shut tight, breath shaking. Isabella reached out and touched her hand, bare now, without gloves. Their fingers laced together. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The garden held its breath. The truth was there, alive and pulsing, waiting. And as they stood tangled in the cusp of something final, neither of them knew that inside the palace, the final bell was about to chime. Not that it mattered. Because what came next would change everything. The final bell tolled across the palace grounds, a low, resonant chime that echoed over the hedges and trembled through the marble, announcing the end of the royal ball. Inside, laughter faded into farewells, and the first guests began their slow exit beneath a sky of stars. But in the garden, beneath the old willow and the flickering lanterns, time had stopped. Casey stood frozen, Her hand still held in Isabella's, her jaw tight with fear and desire and something too old for words. Her confession still hung between them like mist, daughter of a duke, dressed as a lord, built from lies, craving one impossible truth. Isabella didn't let go. She never flinched. Her fingers squeezed gently, anchoring them both in the quiet. "You don't have to want the impossible," she said, her voice soft but certain. "You just have to want me." Casey looked at her like someone witnessing a miracle. Her lips parted, but no words came. Just a breath, sharp and broken, and a flicker of longing so fierce it made the roses bow in the wind. "You deserve someone who can give you a name, a title. I deserve someone who sees me," Isabella interrupted, stepping closer. "And you do. Even when I don't wear a crown. Even when I say nothing. You see the parts of me no one else dares to look at. That's worth more than any name." "You don't know what they'll say," Casey whispered. "What your family will. Let them talk. You're a princess." "And I'm also a woman," she said. "A woman who has never felt like this before. Who has spent years learning how to perform instead of live. And you," she hesitated, breath trembling, "you're the first person who's ever made me want to stay inside my own skin." Casey's eyes glistened. "I didn't think anyone would say that to me. Not like this. Not out loud." Isabella smiled. "Then maybe it's time we both stop hiding." Casey reached up slowly, her fingers brushing Isabella's cheek with such aching care that it made the princess close her eyes. Their foreheads touched, and the world slipped away. The titles, the weight, the expectations. All that remained was the sound of their breathing, the soft rustle of the willow leaves, and the distance between their mouths that begged to be crossed. This time, there was no accident. No hesitation. Their lips met fully, finally, slow and reverent, like a secret sealed beneath moonlight. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't perfect. It was real. And when they broke apart, foreheads still pressed together, Isabella let out a quiet laugh that caught in her throat. "I should be terrified," she whispered. "But I'm not." "Neither am I," Casey said, voice rough with emotion. "I don't want to run anymore." "Then stay. Stay with me." "Even after tonight?" Isabella nodded. "Especially after tonight." From the palace, the music had stopped. The crowd was dispersing. But neither of them moved. They stood wrapped in each other beneath the stars, two women who had stepped outside the limits of what they were told to be and discovered something far more true. "What now?" Casey asked, almost afraid to hope. Isabella pulled back just enough to look her in the eyes. "Now," she said, "we write our own story. Even if no one believes it, they'll see it eventually," Isabella